Thank you for joining me for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. On May the 12th, Michigan Governor Whitmer's order to close the Enbridge Line 5 pipeline took effect. Enbridge has challenged its legality and has so far refused to comply. The matter has gone to the courts, but it already shows the fragility of Canada's fuel supply. Joining us to discuss are two interested observers. First, we have Marilyn Gladu, who is the Member of Parliament for Sarnia-Lambton in Ontario. And David Yager is an energy policy analyst and the author of From Miracle to Menace, Alberta, a Carbon Story. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Marilyn, can I just start with you? And David, I'd like to get your assessment too, but just give us your assessment of where things stand now, what the current state of play is with respect to Line 5.
Well, clearly, Line 5 didn't shut down on May the 12th. The matter is now before the federal court in the U.S. And several people, including the Government of Canada, have submitted briefs of support. And on the other side as well, briefs of support for Governor Whitmer's position. And there's been mediation between Governor Whitmer and Enbridge. And the results of that mediation is also before the court. And so the judge has indicated she will take some time to look at those briefs and then will render a decision on whether the issue should be heard at federal court or at state court level. And we expect that the decision will be federal court level, and then the arguments will be made about why Line 5 should keep operating.
David, what's your assessment of where we're at?
It seemed unlikely. We in the oil business, follow the pipelines and international trade a lot more closely than most Ontario consumers do. But long ago, the international trade, I guess those of us who've been around for a while, go back to this Canada-U.S. Pipeline Transit Treaty of 1977. There's just so much history here. And while we discovered this treaty is still in force, or this agreement is still in force, we forgot why it came to be. And it actually originated from the United States when they wanted to bring their oil and gas down from Alaska through Canada to the lower 48 during the energy crisis. This pipeline was initiated by Americans so that they would do this. In the end, they did do it. They did the Trans-Alaska pipeline to Valdez and by tanker down the coast. But the Mackenzie Valley gas pipeline lived on for a long time.
Right.
So we always felt here that on a political basis, all politics is local, that the governor of Michigan was appealing to her base. Enbridge has a bad reputation in Michigan for reasons we may or may not get to, but they have a little bit of history there. So to see one U.S. governor doing this in the greater picture seemed unlikely on this end of the pipeline. For all the reasons I just mentioned, and as fate would have it, it's where it belongs, in the courts, not in the political arena. So we'll see where it goes. But I think it's highly unlikely that this pipeline will be shut down, replaced expeditiously, I hope. But it's a big deal when you do this. The only place I can think of that mucked around like this was when Russia shut off the gas supplies to the Ukraine. This is big stuff. When you get into transnational or international interruption of energy supplies, you're really out of your league as on a state basis, I hope.
Well, I hope Governor Whitmer doesn't want to be compared with Vladimir Putin. That's probably not a good look for her. Marilyn, can I just turn to you just for a second? You mentioned, I guess, the Trudeau government filing a court brief or an amicus brief to the federal court of the United States. What are you hearing about the Trudeau government's position? They're joining the legal fight, but are they taking this case to President Biden? Are they taking this case seriously?
Well, Tony, I pressed in the House for the Prime Minister to pick up the phone and raise this issue with President Biden, which he did. It's unclear what the response from President Biden is, although I would point out to David's point that Senator Joe Biden, at the time that the treaty was put in place, voted in favor. That said, I think the Trudeau Liberals have been clear that the Line 5 is essential to the economic and energy security of Canada. The parliamentary committee that studied the issue was unanimous that we needed to keep Line 5 open and do everything possible. So the Natural Resources Minister, Seamus O'Regan, has indicated, he will leave no stone unturned, diplomatic, legal, political, etc. But at this point, words are cheap and action is what we need to make sure that we keep the pressure on, because in addition to Canada's concerns, the surrounding states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Indiana, and even Michigan itself, will suffer significant economic damage, and not to mention 50% of the home heating in the hand of Michigan.
Talking about Line 5, the energy pipeline of Enbridge, and how important it is. Marilyn, had to cut you off for the break, but please continue your point. You were talking about how important it is for the various states, not only to Michigan, but the surrounding states, and of course for Canada as well. Please continue your point.
Right. So in addition to the 50% of the home heat in Michigan that comes down Line 5, there are refineries in Ohio and Pennsylvania. All of the fuel for the Detroit airport comes down through the products from Line 5. So, there's a huge impact there. On the same time, Ontario and Quebec will be hugely impacted. That's half of the gasoline, all of the jet fuel for the Pearson airport, the heating for homes, as well as farms and grain drying. So, the impact is very broad. And that's why we all need to come together to continue this fight.
David, I wanted to ask you, what does this debate, you've made the point that things are still flowing, they're before the courts, et cetera, but there's another underlying message here, a broader message that you care about as an energy policy analyst. What does this illustrate about energy security in this country and indeed in this continent? And are there connections to the Alberta debate that I'm sure you're following as well?
If you go back in history, which I did when I wrote the book, Western Canada has been trying to attract the attention of the rest of the country on the energy security issue for some time. In the 50s, as early as the 1950s, the Western producers wanted a link to Montreal. They were at that time, they were bringing their oil in from Venezuela and imported, still are. Energy security became a big issue in the 1970s during the OPEC years when Prime Minister Trudeau, Justin's dad, demanded a pipeline be built from Sarnia to Montreal to make sure that Quebec was protected from international supplies. As fate would have it, when the oil shortage ended, they reversed that pipeline. And then when we tried to reverse the Line 9 again to put Montreal back on Western crude at the request of Suncor, Western producers, you would have thought we wanted to put a nuclear waste dump down on Bay Street. I mean, it was incredible. And this is where we learned, this is another example that's sort of forgotten in history, where we learned about the army of professional pipeline protesters. This wasn't a new pipeline. This wasn't even an empty pipeline. All we wanted to do was make some progress in moving oil sands somewhere. And there was a great battle at that time. So energy security seems to ebb and flow. And because of the extra cost, however minute, it has never really caught on from Southern Ontario east. We look at Energy East. We tried to say, well, how about that? When we couldn't get into the United States, we tried to repurpose an all-Canadian route by using the gas lines on the north side of Lake Superior and have this problem go away. And again, it was there was no shortage of oil. There was no shortage of environmental concerns, and that just died because of basically it was buried under paperwork by the vacillating position of the National Energy Board, the obstruction by Quebec, and the indifference of the Prime Minister. So it is energy security is a bit seasonal or a bit cyclical, if you will, depending on when it's short. Will it be an issue again today? You think so, but we hope so. But it's a long story for us in the West. 70 years. We've been trying to do this. And so we're not optimistic.
I mean, and this is the thing. At the same time that this is happening, of course, in the United States, the ransomware issue with the Colonial pipeline was happening, and all of a sudden, people were lining up for gas with garbage bags. So all of a sudden, people realize, oh my gosh, we do need oil and gas still in our economy. Is that a harbinger? Do you think that people are looking at it from a slightly different angle, David?
There's several events that have happened in the last year that may have people rethinking. There was the electricity shortage in California last year. during the heat wave, they'd gone heavy on renewables, got rid of natural gas. And then, of course, they imported electricity when they were short, but it was also hot in the states from which they imported electricity. There was the mess in Texas.
Right.
Because of an exceptionally cold winter. And what's interesting is they've got a recall motion going on in California that maybe we got the wrong governor. There's businesses leaving there. Warren Buffett has stepped up to save Texas by offering $10 billion in baseload natural gas that has to be built into the power bill. So I think there's an aspirational discussion of what we ought to do about fossil fuels. And then there's the reality, what happens when you pull up to the gas pump and they don't have any, or you hit the switch on the wall and the lights go off. So with what we're doing with the whole energy complex is we're pushing further and further by restricting pipelines, restricting supply, restricting drilling, insisting that interruptible electricity is acceptable.
Yeah.
We're pushing the envelope.
Well, and hold that thought because we do have to take another break, but we'll be right back after these messages. And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Marilyn Gladu. She is the Member of Parliament for Sarnia-Lambton, and she reminded me she is an engineer, so she knows a lot about these kinds of issues. And David Yager, an energy policy analyst as well. So welcome to you both. David, I'm going to start with you. Recently, Governor Whitmer laid out her case in a column in the Washington Post, and she said that Line 5 is dangerously close to collapse, and Enbridge has done nothing. So is this part of the issue as well?
I think you'll find that is the most expected pipeline around. I mean, the issue has been known that pipelines do wear out after time. This pipe's been down there since 1953. And what we have is a really incredibly efficient PICS, electronic PICS, which is a recording device that actually goes through the pipeline. I think if there's anyone that's sensitive to the economic damage of an oil spill, it's Enbridge. They had a very regrettable event 11 years ago with Line 6B. So I would say if that is not the most heavily inspected pipeline in the world, it's right up there. And so, and they have also put forward the plan to tunnel under the lake, put in the concrete barrier, tunnel instead of going on the lake bottom to go underneath it. Of course, there have been fantastic developments in directional drilling to be able to drill underground horizontally for extreme distances. So they're not only are they being careful with the line for obvious commercial, and they're not. It's not just environmental reasons. This is commercial. This is this is a big part of integrity. In business integrity in the 21st century. So there's lots of reasons, and they'd like to replace it. So I believe this is, and maybe we get to that, but I think it's got a lot to do more with votes than it does anything to do with safety.
Marilyn, obviously you're not only a member of Parliament, but you're a member of Her Majesty's loyal opposition. So what is the Conservative Party saying about this, Aaron O'Toole and the rest of the crew there?
Well, we're saying that it's absolutely essential to keep Line 5 open. We don't like the fact that the government waited till the 11th hour to file their brief of support. And we need them to, keep working on this at all levels. There's lobby efforts with the various states, as I mentioned, as well as Washington. And honestly, to call for this mediated solution, which could be the tunnel project that David was talking about. Enbridge would spend $500 million to put that tunnel in place. And the existing pipelines have zero issues in 68 years. As he said, it's inspected by the Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Pipeline Safety Inspection, by Enbridge itself, by the state of Michigan. And so, I think coming with even less risk than that is an ultimate solution that would win for everyone.
I'm going to ask both of you this question. I'll start with you, Marilyn, and David. I want to hear your point of view too. But why is this not a bigger issue amongst the public? This could be, something that really impacts on jobs, on our way of life, on our ability to turn the light switch on, as you mentioned, David. Marilyn, why is the public just not paying attention to this? Is it COVID or is it something else?
No, I get a lot of calls from people that say, well, we need to transition to a greener economy. And I agree, but we're not going to get there in May, like right now. And I'll say to them, do you drive a car? And yeah, well, where do you get your gasoline? That comes down Line 5. Do you eat food, beef, chicken, pork, vegetables, grains? I mean, all those farmers use the propane from Line 5 to heat their homes. Do you have a barbecue with propane on it? you're going to be impacted by this Line 5 shutdown. So I think people are unaware, and it's an opportunity to educate them and then to show the links and how critical this is, not just to the people that work in the industry, but everyone else.
David, you mentioned off air the natural gas debate. Can you weigh in on this and how people can convince the public that this is an important issue?
Yeah, I think just to go back to the first question, just a second, but
Right.
people get their information from this now, and the information streaming capabilities. I read what I want when I want. The mainstream news that, judging by the images on the face that we grew up on, where you got a little dose of everything every day, whether you wanted it or not. And so the natural gas, for example, studies I've read, is something like 3 billion people in the world. The fertilizer that helps feed the world for 3 billion people comes from natural gas or fossil fuels, a nitrogen-based fertilizer where they originally took coal and now they take natural gas out of the atmosphere and create ammonium nitrate, which is the number one source of fertilizer in the world. We've done incredible things of grow. If you remember the population bomb, right back to Malthus, how could the world feed itself? What we've managed to do with fossil fuels and modern agricultural technology is put 7.8 billion people on the planet with less people suffering from malnutrition than ever before. So when people start talking about what we must do, they don't even understand the food chain. I've researched this myself.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm here with Marilyn Gladu. She is the Member of Parliament for Sarnia-Lambton, and David Yager, an energy policy analyst, talking about Line 5. David had to go to break there, but please continue your thought about how these issues can be relevant to the general public.
We've in the industry in the last decade in particular, we've been trying to do what Marilyn's doing and you're doing, is trying to talk to sensitive people and figuring out how to reach them. And then when I researched the book, I discovered that the internet, as wonderful as it is, has discovered that the younger generations don't just get their news what they want to hear, where they want to hear it. So we're still scratching our heads to how we talk people into understanding this. The biggest change in Canada is that 65% of the votes outside of the oil producing regions in Western Canada are in urban areas of over 100,000 people. It's really quite a demographic shift. And not only do we have this problem with oil or gasoline or propane, like you're talking about, nobody has any idea where anything comes from, whether it's 2x4s down at the Home Hardware or the lettuce or groceries. I mean, where do they think lettuce comes from in the middle of winter and fresh fruit? The food, I get a kick out of the federal government. The Food Act says you got to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables, and then they bring in carbon taxes, so they cost more. We got a lot of work to do on how the world actually rotates, and it's not just confined to oil.
Marilyn, do you agree with that? You were talking about how you try to bring it home to your constituents about how every facet of their life does depend on this energy security. Is that something that needs to be stressed?
Yeah, I think we need to continue to educate, because you get a lot of people who, are environmental activists that are overlooking the basic fact that they're driving a car to the protest. They're eating a meal that is produced with the very fossil fuels that they're fighting against. And so Line 5 is just another example of a political agenda that it will hurt all of the constituents that elected Governor Whitmer. And, I think that a better solution is something that will be good for people and will address the environmental and risk concerns, albeit I don't think they're real concerns, but they would address those concerns totally.
What do you see as the next steps in this fight?
Well, at this point, we need to wait for the courts to decide. It'll be heard federally, and then to see what they have to say. I think there are a few states who are also communicating to Governor Whitmer that they will sue her for the economic damage to their states if she shuts that line down. And so I think we need to wait for those interstate interplays to continue. And then either President Biden will intervene to sort it out, or it will come down to a treaty dispute. And that will be a significant thing for the Canada-U.S. relationship.
David Yager, from your point of view, what should we look forward to or fear against?
Well, Unfortunately, the forward includes going backwards. I think we're going to have a little misery here to get people's attention. I think we're seeing that in inflation now. We're seeing it in wood. We're seeing it in food. We're seeing it in the price of gasoline from the commodity cycle, and we're going to see it in rising taxes with the deficit. So I think if life is good and everything's simple and you get paid every month and the price of isn't going up and everything you need is accessible at a reasonable cost. But I think we're going into a period where interest rates are going to go up, and everything that has the ability of the quantitative easing, if you will, the ability of governments to flood the economy with liquidity to disguise the true performance of the economy. I think we're going to have to get everybody's attention the hard way, and tragically, that's going to be very unpleasant and unnecessary if people. But it may be the only way we can get people's attention on where the necessities of life come from and how they get to your house. This is a good example or a bad example, depending on how you want to look at it, but it's way broader than just line 5. It's a society-wide problem today.
Well, indeed, we will be following this closely. This is not by any stretch the final chapter. I want to thank Marilyn, Gladu, and David Yager for being part of this discussion today. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Line 5, continuing story about energy security for this nation and for the people in it. We had 2 great experts there, one of them a member of parliament and an engineer, and the other one an energy policy analyst. I'm going to go out on a limb and say this will not be the last show we do on this because of its ongoing importance. And of course, energy security is a topic that I've covered in the past and will continue to cover. Thanks for watching today.